Welcome back. This is Talk Time. Nigeria's inflation is at a 3-year high, hitting double digits. And with the latest data released by the National Bureau of Statistics, inflation rose to 11.4% in February, after the stability witnessed the previous month. Now, this simply means that you and I are paying more than we used to for goods and services. Yes, that's a very simple way of defining exactly what inflation is, rather than going academic on it this morning. Renowned economist Henry Boyo is in the studio to talk inflation. Good morning to you, and nice to have you. It's always a pleasure. Of course, well, inflation has entered the double digits. That which we feared the most has, it seems like it has, come upon us right now.
It is, it is rather unfortunate that inflation has remained unrestrained in Nigeria. In reality, in successful economies everywhere, inflation should not normally be more than 2%. Okay, and that's for a very important reason. If inflation is, for example, above 10%, it means that all income earners would lose possibly about 50% of the purchasing power of their incomes every 5 years. And if it goes beyond 10%, as it has done, and there still appears to be no expectation that it would be restrained, or that it would not still continue to spiral, then we must be very concerned that we will have very dissatisfied labor force. Indeed, everyone who earns a static income would be in distress at the end of the day if inflation continues to rise well beyond 11.4% that the NBS has stated.
Okay, let me at this point introduce my guest, Ken, if he's on the line from London. Good morning, and good to have you on the show this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Are you really concerned about the double digits, that the inflation figure now stands at 11.4, 11.7, according to some reports? What exactly, Mr. Boyo has said he's concerned about the, lack of measures in place. I did hear that, in your opening remarks there. The CBN has tried so many measures, to make sure that the inflation rate does not go beyond the single digit. But here we are, 11.4.
Yeah, I'm very concerned that the inflation figure has gone up to 11.4%. But I do know that in the next quarter, it might come down around 10.7, 10.8, because when these are the projections, the forward projections, that it will come down slightly. But even then, to be in double digits is a major concern. But we need to recognize some of the key factors that pushed up this inflation figure. Was the petrol price? Also you had the rise in the electricity tariff. And then also generally there was a general increase in food prices, not because those food prices were imported, but they had transportation costs and all that impacting on those food prices. So I know that fuel comes in slowly, and then I don't think there will be anything about the electricity price, because there has been agitation, but I can't see them trying to do anything about it. We will still remain on double digits for quite a while. But you saw the meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, and the way they responded wasn't even likely to, because they are attacking it in the wrong direction, because they go and then push up the monetary policy rate in response. I didn't think there was going to do anything. But those liquidity on the banking side, I accept that, because when they have delivered 1.2 trillion naira into the intervention fund, And it's likely they should claw back some of the liquidity from the commercial banks, because when they gave them 1.5 trillion in response to the TSA implementation, then they were told to lend to the real sector, and they didn't. They were developing coal feed because they were being hit in various oil exposures. So it's going to be trying times ahead.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, but let me come back to my guests in the studio. I mean, Ken Ife seems to have hope that it will come down to 10 point something. I mean, that's still a double digit. How much difference really would, would it make going down from 11.5% to 10 point, whatever figure? And he's talked about the MPR too, and how much or little impact that is actually making, something that the committee, came up with.
You've asked a lot of questions, but I think the important thing is never to take your eyes off the goal. We should not. You see, we as a country, we want to be like the eagles, the first world. Okay, so we should be, excuse me, we should be expected to also do those things that they do in the first world in order to be able to be in that class. Mm. In those economies, you don't have inflation usually going beyond 2%. When it gets to 3%, it is crisis for the reasons that I explained earlier. Mm. Okay, that is why the CBN is given the mandate with a constitutional instrument, which is the 2007 Act, to have total responsibility for monetary policy. And the most important objective of monetary policy is to restrain inflation at reasonable best practice rates. Okay. Sorry
to cut you there. When you say to restrain inflation, I mean, you're talking about a deliberate policy here to make sure that the value of the naira does not go beyond a certain level. Shouldn't it really be a function of demand and supply? Absolutely.
That is the reason why the basic definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. So you have a demand, and of course the demand is unsatisfied in spite of the fact that you have so much money chasing these goods. So if you have this ratio of a smaller number of goods and a huge number of huge amount of money, you will invariably have inflation. The reality, therefore, that you have consistently remained incapable of managing inflation to best practice levels of 2% is clearly the result of your inability, or the inability of the central bank, which has the responsibility for this, to keep money supply within reasonable limits. That is the reason why you have, on a continuous, never-ending basis, the central bank is forever mopping up excess liquidity. I want to ask you, isn't there a contradiction here if the real sector says there's no money to borrow, where it is available, it is so expensive? On the other hand, the CBN holds that there is so much money in the system, such that it has to do something that would be counterproductive. In other words, you would want to debar people from borrowing, and in doing so, they raise the monetary policy rate, as Ken has said. If you have a situation where you have a huge level of unemployment and you intend to be able to create economic activity, industrial activity, you want people to be able to spend money. When they spend money, they create what you call consumer demand.
So what is responsible for these contradictions that you talk about? I mean, the real sector is complaining there are no funds. The CBN is saying too much money sitting,
that I have to even borrow it back. Exactly.
What exactly is wrong here?
Well, I think they in order to determine what is wrong, it's probably easier to determine who are the beneficiaries of this wrong system, because you will understand that the beneficiaries of a skewed system would want it to subsist so that they can continue to take their pound of flesh, so to speak. And you will find that the main beneficiaries of CBN's excess liquidity surfeit, constant excess liquidity surfeit, are the banks predominantly. Okay? In the first quarter of this year, the CBN has already mopped up about 1.5 trillion naira out of the system. In other words, instead of making money available to the real sector so they can borrow cheaply and create jobs, instead, the CBN would prefer, because of the fear of inflation, to take out this money and restrain people from borrowing the money. And if they have to borrow,
yes,
then they would have to be very cautious, because with an MPR of 12% to the banking community, it means the banks are forced to lend to the real sector or to their borrowers at over 20%. So at the end of the day, the same liquidity that drives inflation, that makes inflation uncontrollable, is also responsible for the high cost of funds that make it totally impossible for Nigerian goods to be competitive.
In what way really do the banks benefit from, you know, this?
Excellent. That's a good question.
Yes. In what way do they benefit?
Wouldn't you be happy to have somebody provide you with surplus funds on one hand, to put funds in your hands on one hand, and then for the person to turn around and say, "Oh, my dear, how come you have too much money in your hands? If I leave it in your hands, you will spend it and create inflation. So let me take it from you." And they take it from you and borrow it from you and pay you interest. Okay. Meanwhile, the banks have surplus money. You will recognize on very many occasions that the central bank itself would complain. The banks have money. We have given them money. We have made available money for them to lend, but they don't lend to the real sector. But what they don't tell you is that because the banks don't lend to the real sector, the CBN steps in place of the real sector and says, "Don't worry, banks, I'll borrow this money from you and keep it and still pay you 10, 11, 12%. And you ask me that who benefits? In this regard, the banks make over 500 billion every year as interest charges on funds that are kept idle by the central bank. And indeed, all three central banks in the past, bank governors in the past, have lamented this same thing. I remember Sanusi, the president governor of Emma of Kano, once said something like, "Isn't it a wonderful business model we have for the banks? We put money in their hands and then we go back and lend it back, and we worry why they don't lend to the real sector." Who wouldn't want to earn such easy money?
Indeed. Okay, we've reconnected with Kenny Fair, an economist on the line from London. I'd like you to weigh in on what Mr. Henry Boyo has just said concerning the seeming collusion on the part of the banks, you know, as represented by the Central Bank of Nigeria in, you know, the situation that we have on our hands right now.
Okay, I just wanted us to take a little backseat, because now you're not going to think about there's a cost push inflation and there's a demand pull inflation. There's an extent to which the cost parameter has actually affected the inflation figures, as I've tried to explain before. You know, giving some of the indices. Now, what concerns me the most is that we are in recession, and there's no greater time to push down inflation than in recession. You cannot have inflation rising when you are facing recession, because that becomes stagflation. And, you know, if you look at America and Europe and all the other economies that were fighting recession, they are on 0 to 1% interest rates, and also their inflation figures are very, very low, well under 2%. So then you cannot have too many things are moving in the opposite direction in our economy in relation to the recession. One is that unemployment is going up, the borrowing is going up, the inflation is going up, the interest rate is going up. All these should be trending down, not going up. You know, that's number one. Then number two is two decisions that were taken by the Monetary Policy Committee. One I agree with, the other one I don't agree with. The one that I agree with is sucking back liquidity from the central bank, because When the TVC took away 1.2 billion from the bank, those federal government deposits, the bank screamed on liquidity. So the Monetary Policy Committee reacted twice. Said they reduced the CRR ratio, the cash reserve ratio from 31 to 25%. They're losing nearly 740 billion for them. Then they reduced it again in subsequent meeting to 20, releasing 840 billion. So altogether, they had about 1.5 trillion liquidity. But there was an injunction, please lend to the real sector. And they didn't. I didn't see any evidence that they were, because they already developed currency because of all the pressure that they were having from the oil exporters. So now, it was legitimate. And even if they had lent to the private sector anyway, it would have been over 20% interest rates anyway. So, but now to have sucked back some of that money and then release it back to the intervention fund means that you can actually lend a single digit. So it's actually more advantageous. And you don't have to use commercial banks for all that lending. If you're lending to MSMEs, then you can use microfinance banks, use commercial banks, you use a mixture of lending instruments to reach them. So that is even more advantageous, because you can target money, you can target and really sell some of them for particular sectors and all that stuff, as long as it's an intervention fund. So I supported that, because the banks have not learned any lesson. But then the second point that I didn't agree with is to simply push up the monetary policy rate, just because the inflation figure has ticked up. I think Syria that fits in into the whole calculus. And I thought that could even do more damage. Because when you do that, whatever the tension the banks have to lend to the private sector, they will push it up, in inflation. And it doesn't actually help the yields, because the yields on securities are high. And the part of the argument about bringing down the NPI rate is to help push down the price of the yields. And it did succeed, because it started moving down from 14 to 15, down to 12 to 13, 11 to 14. So but now the revenue is going to be trending up. So that's my concern.
Okay, let me come back to my guest in the studio. He did say something there, that it's during a recession that you actually control inflation, if I got him right, and you seem to agree with some of the points he was making there. You